Hello, my name's Eric Bedard, and I'm a member of the Windsor Magic Circle, Ring 116. My father was a magician, Ray Bedard, and he actually was a salesman for Gilby's Distillery. They make rye way many years ago. So he called himself the Great Gilbini. Now, to backtrack just a little bit, my father wanted to go in the war when it started in 1945, but he was too young. So he got a job with I want to say traveling Wilburys, but it wasn't the traveling Wilburys, but something very similar to that. And they were a touring group that went to throughout northern Ontario because there was actual prisoner of war camps up in northern Ontario, Kirkland Lake, and he was an acrobat. He was 7 or 8 years old, and his partner was Eric Davis, and the two of them did tumbling and acrobats. I'm named after Eric Davis. And I grew up as a young boy. My father would often walk up the stairs to, we lived in a two-story home, and he'd walk up the stairs on his hands. And for a while, we were the Great Gilbini and Son. So I think I started when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I would go out on stage and carry out the props. I didn't really do any magic then. When I was 12 or 13, he slowly started to let me do self-working magic tricks, a squared circle and silk productions. And then when I was 14, I did my first solo show. It was for the Catholic Women's League in North Bay, Ontario, at Corpus Christi Church. There was about 200 ladies, and I was supposed to do a 45-minute show, and I was done in 21 minutes because I was so nervous and so excited. I talked so fast, and I was just going from trick to trick. And then I did a few shows, more shows with my dad. And then when I was about 18 after high school, I got a job as with a rock and roll band. And I was the sound man and I was the light man first and a roadie, and then I became the sound man, and then I would introduce them on stage with a silk to cane or fire stick to cane. And then in my 20s, I kind of got out of magic. I always did tricks at parties. And in 1987, at the age of 37, I was born in 1950, the bug just hit me again. I started playing with cards, and at first I was kind of a move monkey. I would learn moves for no reason, just because they were challenging and good, and then I would try and find a trick that I could use the move in. It was kind of backward thinking. Yes, so I was in sales then, and I started doing a few shows, after dinner banquet shows. And at first, I more specialized in sleight of hand as I learned more techniques, and it seemed to be my love, a deck of cards and a few other items. I started doing a lot of walk around shows, strolling magic. I worked for a cement company. We sold concrete and block and brick out of North Bay, and we started doing trade shows to promote our products. So I started doing magic at the trade shows to draw people to the booth. And it worked very well. But in Northern Ontario, you don't sell a lot of block and brick and concrete in the winter. But the company kept me on, and I had a company car, an expense account. And I actually approached them and said, why don't you lay me off in the winter? And then I can go do a few other trade shows for other companies, because I'd been approached many times at the trade shows. They didn't pay me my salary, but they kept my benefits, let me keep the company car, and paid for my gas expenses. But it saved them their salary, and I started doing trade shows. And then eventually, after a couple of years, I started getting so many trade shows. Trade shows are very grueling work. You're on your feet a lot, but it's very well paying. And I left the company in 1991 and started doing trade shows full time. One year I did 31 trade shows. Whenever they had a lot of times they would have trade shows for people in trade shows to book either entertainment or facilities or booth setups. And I would always rent a booth at those shows. And I had a great big banner made that said magic. And I printed, most of these were in the US, and I printed out $1,000 treasury notes with my picture on them. And on the back, I had a couple of quotes from trade show clients. One of my best quotes was from Icon. I did many trade shows for them. And it said, the best investment we've ever made. We had more qualified prospects in the first 3 hours than we did in the same show in 3 days last year. Thank you, Eric. I gave out these $1,000 bills and said, this is $1,000 off your first trade show. And I booked a few trade shows out of that. Then we moved to Victoria in 1993. Linda and I moved in 1994, but in 1993, I went out to visit my sister. And I got in with the magic community there, and I met Tony Ng, who owned the local magic shop. And I was walking along the inner harbor, and I saw this paddle wheeler, a giant paddle wheeler ship, pulling into the inner harbor. And I thought, what the heck is that? So I walked down to the ship, and I waited till they moored and the people got off. And I said, what is this? And the guy said, oh, this is a replica of the SS Beaver, very famous ship in Canadian history. It's called the ship that saved the West. And the manager came off, and so he was trying to sell the ship. He said, we're going to be doing fine dining tours. And I said, oh, you need a magician on the ship. And he said, what do you mean, like pick a card? And I said, oh, no. I do close-up illusions in people's hands. I use fire, all kinds of things. It's way beyond pick a card stuff. And he said, well, we're doing a fam tour next Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever night it was, for all the tour operators and maitre d's in the city. Do you want to come and work it for free so we can see? I said, absolutely. So I went down that night. I got a list of all the people that were on the ship. I made up a dozen newspaper headlines. I do a trick with a prediction with a person's name and a newspaper headline. And at every table I went to, I got tremendous response. Because once you get on the paddle wheeler and you have the meal and you're out in the ocean, it's beautiful. But then it gets dark. And you can't see anything out the windows. So people are just sitting. They can't go anywhere. We're at sea. So it was great. And every table I went to, people tried to tip me, and I would say no. But if you enjoyed the show, please make sure you tell the manager on the way out. And I said that at every table. And after everyone left the ship, the manager came over and he said, we are never setting sail without you on board. So I worked there for 4 years, and at first it was slow going, but in the height, we were doing 30 to 40 cruises a month, because sometimes on a Saturday, we'd do a breakfast brunch cruise, then we'd do an afternoon cruise, a lot of times a wedding. People would book the ship for a wedding. Many times I would be the MC, because they hadn't really thought of the garter toss and the first dance and the maitre d' and the best man and maid of honor speeches, and I had a list for all that. Then we would do the dinner cruise, which was from 5:30 to 8:30. We'd come in, turn around. We'd do a blues cruise from 9 to 1 or 9 till midnight. We'd come in and dock, and during the summer we'd do a dry grad after that. So sometimes I'd be at the ship at 7 in the morning and leave at 6 the next morning. But it was 5 cruises. I was well paid for each cruise. Plus I got a share of boarding tips. I got my son a job as the chef. It was really good. Baron of beef, salmon. It was a really good meal. I had my daughter working behind the bar, and my best friend was Christy Carmichael was the DJ. There was a dance floor down below. So in about 1996 or 97, there was a couple on board the ship, Mike Ravenhill and his wife Cassandra. And Mike Ravenhill was the CEO with the David Foster Foundation. And him and his wife, Mike was originally from Victoria. I think he might have been living in Phoenix at this time. He had just recently moved to Phoenix. And Mike used to own a Touch of Class, was an event producing company, very high-end events. He was just getting out of that because he was getting full-time with the David Foster Foundation. And he said to me about 4 times while I was doing magic, what are you doing on this ship. You you should be elsewhere. You should be working internationally. You should be doing. I mean, one of the advantages, and not to brag, but one of the advantages of doing 5 cruises in a day and sometimes 30 and 40 in a month, your chops get really sharp. You know, you get really, you get good at doing magic and approaching people. You find out what works. When I entered competitions, you know, I've been very fortunate to win 12 different international awards and close-up, sleight of hand, stage comedy, magic, all those things. Is I could go out and try something 200-300 times in a month with real people and perfect it a year ahead of time before the competition. Anyways, Michael booked me for my first David Foster gala, and I was hired to work the green room and the after party. So I wasn't involved in the big gala because there would be 1,000 people there. The David Foster Foundation is a charitable foundation, and that's a long story, a side story, but they pay all the expenses for a family when their child has to have a life-saving organ transplant. Back then, that type of procedure was not covered in Canada. They had to go to the US. So if someone's child had to have all kinds of organs transplanted, they could be in the hospital for a year, and the parents couldn't afford to be with the child. So David Foster would replace the salaries of the husband and the wife, pay for their expenses, pay their mortgage, their car payments, everything for them while they were at the hospital taking care of their child. They still do that. They've helped, I think it's 1,400 over families over the years. So that led to me getting to perform for countless number of celebrities. I mean, my very first show, I got to perform for Merv Griffin, Patti LaBelle, Johnny Rivers, Johnny Mathis. I was performing in the green room, and a funny little story, Patti LaBelle just loved it. I had done a newspaper prediction for her. And she left because the green room was kind of small, and she had a 12 or 13 piece orchestra with her, and then another 6 or 8 backup singers. So there was 20 people with her. So she came to bring them all into the green room so they could see my magic. And the security guard wouldn't let her in. She said, "I'm sorry, that's too many people." And Patty said, "If you don't let my band in to see the cool magic dude, I'm not going on stage. So you go tell David Foster I'm not performing tonight." So anyways, they all came in. I got to perform for them all. Patty was an amazing lady. At the end of the evening, I had worked the after party, and they had kind of left, and it was dwindling down. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and Patty came down, and she's saying, "Where's the magic dude? Where's the magic dude?" And I could hear her, and somebody said, "He's over there." She came over, and she said, "Listen," she had the newspaper headline, and she said, "I really enjoyed this, but to be honest with you, I'm not going to take this back to LA with me. How about if I sign it and give it back to you as a keepsake?" And I just thought, oh my goodness, that's so beautiful. So she wrote, "Eric, thanks for the magic. God bless your hands, Patty." And of course, I still have it. And then over the years, I started doing other shows with Mike Ravenhill. He would fly me down to do some huge events for some of his millionaire and billionaire clients. Private parties, and I also got to do many shows for celebrities. 2 of them for Olivia Newton-John. One of them, I have a picture. She asked me for my autograph. And I remember running to the phone and calling Linda and saying, "Honey, sit down. Olivia Newton-John just asked me for my autograph." Little French kid from North Bay, Ontario. And then that went well. And then in 2005, I was still doing these shows, but I mean, the Foster Gala is one a year, and I've done 21 of them over the years, because a couple of years there was a couple of other fundraising events in between. And then I would do 3 or 4 shows with Mike Ravenhill, but not much else. And It's tough when you got to keep promoting yourself and promoting yourself. And then I decided I want to get on cruise ships. And Victoria gets about, I think back then it was about 160 to 180 cruise ships a year coming in to port for the day. So I found out through the internet who the magician was on the ship, and I would contact them. So James Seelan, Greg Fruin, many of the top cruise ship magicians in the world, I contacted them ahead of time and I said, you're going to be in port on Sunday from 6 p.m. till midnight. I've got a cool Jeep with the top down. If you're interested, I'll pick you up, take you on a tour. We can go out for supper. Sometimes they were in town from 9 in the morning till 9 at night. So I picked up every one of them for months, and I would pick their brain. And many of them I became friends with. Greg Fruin, who has a magic studio in Niagara Falls, and who has performed for Princess of Monaco. Well, his father was his booking agent. So he said, you have to make a really good promotional video. Let me know when you have it done. I'm pulling in here every Sunday for the next 4 months or whatever, or 3 months. He was on the Alaska run. So I did a couple of shows. We had a very active magic ring in Victoria and put on several big shows a year at the Isabel Reader Theatre. We did one called Mirth and Magic, and then the Wandsboro Comedy Competition. We would sell tickets, and we would get 200 to 300 people in the audience. So it was a great time to get a recording of me being on stage with a live audience. And so finally, after 3 weeks or a month, whatever it was, Greg came in and I gave him it was VHS then. I gave him my VHS tape. He came back the following week, and it was 7 minutes and 40 seconds, something like that. He came back, he said, it's way too long. He said, I want to see no more than 4 minutes. 3 is better. He said, in the first 30 seconds, I want to see 2 or 3 different audiences of people laughing and enjoying themselves. So I went back to my editor because I had lots of footage, and I still have the clip, the video, and it starts off with 3 different people introducing me on a big stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the cool magic dude, Eric Bedard, and then audience laughing. And I sent that off to Dawn Casino Productions. But anyways, one day I got a call, and from Wendy. Her name is different. It was Wendy Casino then. Now it's Wendy Garvis. She's manager. And Dawn Casino Productions is the largest agency for cruise ship entertainers, singers, songwriters, variety acts in the world. They have probably handled 80%. So I got a call to go do a cruise in October, and it was like the next week, and I was terrified. And I just said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm booked for October. So she booked me for December 18th on the Caribbean Princess. I flew in. I did 3 shows that night because it was the holiday. So they had a 7 o'clock show, an 8:30 show, and a 10:30 show. And fortunately, my shows went well. The first show I got a standing ovation. I didn't at the second and third, but I got great applause, lots of people signing autographs. I got rave reviews. And for the next 5 years, my first year I did 194 days at sea. And with all the traveling days, because sometimes it's 2 days each way, took up the most part of my year, except for a gig for David Foster and 2 for Mike Ravenhill. That was all I did. And then after 5 years, I felt like my wife and I had bought a new condo, and she was enjoying it. I wasn't. Then I got Norwalk twice. By twice, I mean I got Norwalk, and I was sick confined in my cabin for 5 days. I was let out for a couple hours, and I got it again. Back to my cabin. So I couldn't leave. They had to bring my meals every day. Oh, I was violently ill. And I just decided I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, the thrill is gone. I've been all around the world, from Russia to Japan to China, through the Caribbean, through the Mediterranean. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. That was 2009. I eventually retired in June, but I retired, I think in like April. I called the crews and I said, I'm done. They said, okay. Then I got home and I rested for a week, and then I sat down at I had a Power Mac back then. I think it had 640 megs of memory. And I pull up my calendar and go, oh, I have nothing booked forever. Nothing. There's nothing down the road. There's a David Foster, one event. And it's hard because I had turned down shows for 5 years, so people forget about you. And about 2 days later, Wendy called from Don Casino and said, Eric, I know you're retired. We've got a cruise. It's 5 days. It's a 9-day cruise, but the magician had to flew out due to an emergency. We'll fly you down. With the flying day, it'll only be 5 days. So 4 days on the ship. We'll pay you the full week. And I said, sure. So I flew to Panama City. And while I was at the hotel, she called me and said, listen, I can't book any for the next cruise. Can you stay on for one more cruise? A 9-day. So now I'm going to be 14 days on the ship. And I said, okay. Because now for 14 days for 3 cruises, I'm going to get paid, 2 weeks, good pay, and American money. And by the second cruise, I had done my 2 shows and I was still on for 4 more days. And after pulling into Jamaica at the same port that you've been to, and I literally went back into my cabin, closed the door, and I started to cry. And I was just like, I'm lonesome. I miss my wife. We had a granddaughter then. We didn't have the other 4 grandchildren yet. And I went home, and that was the last cruise I ever did. That was it. I was fortunate that after that, shows with David Foster picked up. He started doing 3 or 4 mini fundraisers where people would pay like $1,500 a plate, and there would be 100 or 150 people in a private, usually at a very, very wealthy person's home, where Mike Ravenhill would fly in, set up tents. Oh, the galas that Michael would put on are absolutely out of this world at some very, very posh events. And at most of those, I did walk around magic. I would do strolling magic, many, many headlines, and after parties. And some of those after parties led to other bookings. And probably one of my biggest strengths, and again, without bragging, but when you're in the self-promotion business, but one of my biggest strengths is creating new routines. My most favorite thing to do for a company or a person, usually a company, an organization, to promote their logo, their slogan, their mission statement. I study companies. I read everything on their website, print out pages, and I start highlighting. And then I take all those highlighting sections and put them into a document. And then I get great big writing pads and I put 3 or 4 sheets on the wall with green painter's tape. And I start reading that and I go, oh, I could do that trick here, but say this. So when I say create, sometimes I create an actual new effect, but a lot of times I'm just integrating routines that we already do, stuff that you do, stuff that I do, that many of us that are working already do, but I give it a twist so it promotes the company or the slogan or their message. Linda retired in June of 2019. I was kind of semi-retired. I was doing 8 or 10 shows a year, which was fine for me. I was past 65, so I was getting, CPP and old age pension, and it was kind of a nice time in my life. And so Linda came to me and said, I want to move back to Ontario. And she said, we'll move to Peterborough, because my brother Jim lives right outside of Peterborough, and him and I are best friends. And Linda's sister Nancy is not too far from Peterborough. We moved to Peterborough in June of 2019. In October, my sister phoned me. She lives in just outside of North Bay in Powassan, and said, they have a 100+ acre horse ranch. And her husband is a house builder, good friend as well, my brother-in-law, Rolly. And she said, we'll build you a house. That was kind of a no-brainer. So we moved to North Bay, or Powassan, and they had some rental properties. We stayed with them in one of their rental properties. And my cousin Rolly and I, we built the house. Linda and I moved in December. And then we were coming down to Windsor every 2 weeks because her parents, and it was just about time to get them out of their house. So Linda would make 2 weeks of meals for them. We'd come down. I'd do all the outside work. We'd go back home, back to North Bay. We'd doing this. And finally one day, Linda said, we should just move to Windsor. And I said, absolutely. I forgot how much I actually liked Windsor. And I like to bicycle ride, like to ride my bike everywhere, and I've taken up golf. And I can do both of those much longer down here. They're still not golfing up in North Bay, Powassan, and I've been out 3 or 4 times already this year, and it's early April. So we moved down here in April, a year ago. June of last year, my daughter and her son-in-law moved to Windsor. Same thing. He retired. She can work out of her home. And the 4 of us bought a great big house together that has a grandfather suite on the back of it. So we've been living there. And so I retired in magic and then kind of got back into it. I retired when we moved to Peterborough and North Bay when the pandemic hit. I was actually scheduled to do a lecture tour. I had about 20 city tour booked up. I didn't book it, but through a lecture tour. And then the pandemic hit. So that fell through. And now I still consider myself semi-retired. I'm very active with the Detroit Magic Circle and with the Windsor Magic Circle. And I get to perform at the Magic Soiree in Detroit. And through that and through a few connections, I've picked up a few other shows. So I'm back to doing 8 to 10 shows a year. And now I'm at the point in my career, I thought I was in almost semi-retirement, which I was. And then I went down to Florida February 1st, so the last week of January. And I did a show there February 1st at a RV park that my sister has a mobile home in. And it went over really well. And one of the things I enjoy the most is being a member of the Windsor Magic Circle. There's a lot of people like yourself, Bill DeLeva, that have been performing for many, many years. And, Brad and Scott to some extent. But a lot of people in the club. Johnny Old, my goodness, there's a fountain of knowledge of magic. And I just love his stories. So it's an honor and a pleasure. And now having Chris Philpott in the club, one of the most prolific magic creators in the world today. So I enjoy. Next week I get to go to a magic meeting on Tuesday at the Detroit Magic Circle. We get 50 members out there. Wednesday I get a meeting here with the Magic Club. So that's the highlight of life and times right now for me. My biggest piece of advice would be, if possible, find a mentor. Contact somebody at the Windsor Magic Circle. Either join the club or get a hold of Elizabeth Irene. She runs if you're under 16, let's say, she runs the children's group or the kids group. I'm not sure the exact title, but and there you can learn some great basic skills of magic. If possible, as I mentioned, you find a mentor. We have a member of the Windsor Magic Club right now, a young gentleman who's asked me to be his mentor, and I've said yes. So I give him a couple little things to work on. So it would be to learn. There's some great books out there. I would try to stay away from YouTube too much. There's a lot of people that do magic on YouTube are doing magic for one person, just for the camera. This trick works good here, but not if you look this way or this way. So, they say human experience is non-transferable. So you got to get out there and perform, as you well know. So performing like that, once you learn a few tricks, without becoming a pest on your family and friends. And then if you want to take it a step further, learn some of the philosophy. If you want to get into close-up magic, you should read Strong Magic by Darwin Ortiz. If you want to do stage magic, you should read Maximum Entertainment by Ken Weber, where he talks about blocking and lighting and sound and all the things. You know, too many magicians nowadays just want the latest great, what's the newest magic trick that's going to make me a star? And as you well know, we all have so many tricks already in our repertoire. I mean, it's fun to stay current. I've probably bought 5 new tricks this since January. Things that I'll slowly add in to, or play with, because it's fun, you know. But yeah, learn from the pros. All right. Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to watch this, and come and visit the Windsor Magic Club. You'll really enjoy it. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.